Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your priceless knowledge with us. We will now move on to a panel discussion, which would involve Mr. Patrick Sinz, Ms. Elizabeth, Mr. Jan, and Mr. Matthias as the moderator of this session. I would kindly request them all to come on stage and start the panel discussion.
Good day and good morning, everybody. My name is Matthias Stürmer. I'm from Switzerland, and I'm very happy to be here in this wonderful country. And I have the honor to moderate this panel this morning with Jan, Liz, and Patrick. And I have noted a lot of questions for myself, but I would also like to invite you to ask questions. So please think of certain topics, certain things are not yet clear, and come forward. But first of all, I would like to start with a question to Liz. You have explained us in a very good way on how you came to open source. And so what I was wondering, I think you have a highly competitive advantage because you are a native English-speaking person. So I was wondering, so how is it for speakers like, or for people like myself or others who are not native English-speaking? What can you recommend to them regarding the English language?
That's a really great question. As you imply, most open source projects are written in English. One of the things I tend to recommend is that if the open source project has a translations team, or people working in translations, they might want to start there. That will get them with people who speak their language natively. And so you start building up your community there with people who speak your language, are part of your culture, and can get familiar there. And you can ask them, what the next step is if some of them are involved in the wider project. Also mention that as open source projects, we try to be understanding of language barriers and people who are not native speakers. So I want to encourage you to be brave and to go ahead and post on an English mailing list, and we will try our best to be gentle.
And so you don't correct the people by their language if they do spelling mistakes?
Using OpenStack as an example, in code reviews, we will sometimes correct people in commit messages and comments and things. Partially to help other non-native speakers, because if someone has a grammatical error or a spelling error, then it's harder for other non-native speakers to understand what that says. But we work really hard to not say, this is wrong, fix it. We'll say, this is wrong, here is what you should say, and try to help them, have the correct answer instead of just saying it's not right.
So basically the conclusion is there is no, language shouldn't be an obstacle to not contribute to open source.
That is what I say. I mean, speaking English or being familiar with English is definitely important, but unless you're going to, even with translations, because you're translating from English to your language. But I want to encourage non-native speakers, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Jan, you are working with a full open source company, as we have heard. So how do you actually recruit your people?
Well, people recruit us most of the time. No, but practically Red Hat is a big company. We're 8,000 people now. That is not all of them are developers, naturally. So we have a lot of people in sales and in marketing, finance, legal. So that's your normal job offering, where we put out a job offering, people send their resumes, and we hire them. And so on. In engineering, it's a little bit different. As an open source company, we deliver products based on upstream projects, and thousands of them. but we cannot be active in all of these projects, and we cannot definitely never dictate them. So what we are interested in is when we identify something that is important for our customers, for our products, we look at the upstream community and try to find the people in the upstream community that have the highest social status and reputation, not necessarily the best coders. We are not really interested in people that can code like crazy, etc. For a lot of reasons, especially these people tend to have some problems with integrating in bigger organizations. And so we look at the people that have good standing in the community that can help us when our customers tell us we need this and that in that upstream product, we need this and that feature, so that we find somebody that can translate between the interests of Red Hat and our customers and the interests of the upstream community. And that's not necessarily always the best coder. And we find these people typically at conferences and online. The good thing about open source, if you're an active open source developer, your resume is already online on GitHub effectively. And so we can scan through there and we can see who is working on the stuff that we're interested in. And then we meet them at conferences, for example, in Foss and in Brussels, which is the world's biggest gathering of open source developers. There are some 7,000 developers from all over the world going to Foss every February. They are all freezing because it's cold and it's one of the most dirtiest universities in Brussels. It's all grassroots, nothing is really organized. You get sandwiches and cheap beer, and that's about it. But that's where 7,000 people come together every year since 14 years to discuss. That's where we send our people to give presentations, and they are equipped then with the information. What jobs are we filling? What positions are we looking for? And then you also have to respect these people, because not all of them, or the majority of them, will refuse to go to an office to work. Now, so our offer to open source developers is effectively continue to work upstream, do your stuff in the open, and only a very, very little bit is really Red Hat related. We are more interested in healthy upstream communities than in us getting more revenue. If these upstream communities stop to produce the high quality stuff they do, we as a company stop to exist.
So basically the conclusion from you is basically get a GitHub account and present yourself as a contributor on this and profile everything as much as possible.
And be friendly.
Be friendly.
Just don't be arrogant. Don't tell the world that you're the best coder on this planet and nobody can tell you how to do it better, because you're fundamentally wrong, I can promise you.
Okay, I don't think this is a problem here because I have experienced very warm hospitality so far. Patrick, I have heard that there are occasions where actually people developed open source, let's be specific, in a Linux kernel. They developed a patch, they submitted it, and once they got accepted this patch, they actually received several job offers from Google, from Oracle, from other big corporations. So do I need to be a Linux kernel committer until I get such possibilities, or is there other possibilities?
There are a couple of other possibilities. Not everybody wants to become a Linux kernel hacker. There are actually not that many. It's a very specialized skill. It's true that contributing to any kind of open source community makes you more visible. The first thing that you can do is learning to use whatever platform, system, language you are really interested in. Another way to get lots of job offers is to become a good statistician and an expert in using R, which is an open source platform to do big data analysis. A friend of mine just got hired by Google. She didn't have to patch any kernels. She just had to know what to do with billions and billions of data. So there's many doors. I would say actually the question is not so much do you need to participate, is can you not participate? And I think that there's the answer is no.
Okay, that's a very interesting conclusion, thanks. So I have many more questions, but please let us know if you have a question. Yes, over here.
Hello, my name is Abdullah Barwani from the Information Technology Authority. Well, for the open source is definitely a great idea, and even in the local market we're getting a lot of buy-in from people and also from companies. As you have seen from the exhibition, that we have even local companies who have adopted open source. to build their products on. But the biggest concern is really security. Now the thinking around is that since it is open and it is on the community, so everybody and anybody can see the code and they can discover if there are any bugs or vulnerabilities, and for of course the black hackers that would take advantage. It's a general question that could be answered by any of the panelists. So what's the deal with security? From Red Hat or HP or a community version of the open source, how can we as a community secure the code that we're using, especially for critical systems?
Thank you very much for this very good question. We had these cases of heartbleed last year. What is bleeding this year?
Well, the thing is, what many people fail to see is when you develop in the open and you develop in a community, you already have a lot of people looking at the code before it actually goes into the product. So we catch a lot of this stuff even before anybody has used it. In the proprietary world, it's actually the other way around. You don't know what's in there, you don't know where the hacks are, and people may find stuff. Look at the Microsoft Patch Tuesdays and all the problems that are caused there. The fact is that open source is proven, there's research on this, is provenly more secure than any proprietary offering, period. The defect rate in open source code is far lower compared to proprietary solutions. The second thing, and that is far more important, is how do you build a reputation by hacking into stuff? In the proprietary world, when you found a bug in Microsoft Windows, you try to build a botnet and you try to destroy as much stuff as you can. And that makes you famous in the hacker world. Everybody likes you there. In open source, it's completely different. In open source, you gain a reputation by informing the project, here is a bug and here is the fix. This is how you do it, to show how smart you really are, not only finding the bug, but also showing in the open, how did I find it, what did I do exactly, and how do we take countermeasures, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again. The reaction time and reaction speed is what sets open source completely apart. We talked about shell shock and heartbleed. In that case, something is out in the public about a really high-risk bug, and then we have to come up with a fix. In the case of shell shock and heartbleed, through coordinated efforts in the open source communities, we have these communication channels. We were able to put out the fixes in hours, compared to a list of at least 20 high-level security problems with Microsoft Windows that have not been fixed for 6 months. So tell me again, are we really that insecure? The reality is exactly the opposite. Open source is by definition and by the way we work, in most parts more secure. I'm not talking about obscure little projects done by one man and his dog in the basement. There might be lots of problems there. I'm not talking about stuff written in PHP, let's not go there. But in general, open source, by the support of companies like Red Hat and other companies, security is our biggest concern, and we offer right now highly secure solutions already.
Jan, let me still challenge you a little bit. Especially this heartbleed issue, this was within the project for many years, which is actually, even for me, as I'm doing open source research for many years, it was a little bit a shock, I must admit, and I was a little bit, a perfect world was destroyed for myself. So we all think of open source being reviewed, code reviewed and everything, so was this now the first and the only such mistake which was uncovered, or will there be more such really hurtful?
Oh, definitely there will be more. It's the nature of the beast. You take open source code that has been used for purpose X for X years, and then you suddenly use it in a completely different context. We see this right now happening with a lot of code in the OpenStack project, where code is taken in and used in ways that maybe weren't intended before. And that will result in bugs. On the other hand, just last Tuesday, Microsoft published a patch for, they didn't even, it's not even finished yet. They're working on a patch for a bug that sits in Windows since more than 10 years. So really, this stuff happens. It's normal. You cannot catch everything. What you can do and should do is to have systems to contain such errors, which we have, for example, in Red Hat with SA Linux, with security enhanced Linux. In Ubuntu, you can use AppArmor. So even if it fails, you still have a line of defense that you can work with. And that's well documented and gives a clear separation on who cares about security, who cares about code, and that's how you can cooperate in different ways. So we have, every piece of software will always have bugs, period. No way out. The real question is, how fast can we react to them, and how proactive can we be in finding them? Heartbleed wasn't found for a lot of specific reasons. Shell shock wasn't found for a lot of specific reasons. Typically it is about code that sits somewhere and nobody's really used it for a long time, and then you have the bit rotting. But we all learn extremely fast and extremely public from this. Shell shock was in the public. Everybody was discussing it. Is everything going down? Now, the New York Stock Exchange, Deutsche Börse, etc., they run on Linux. And this is the most mission-critical stuff on this planet. They didn't go down due to this. Why? Because it could be easily contained the moment it was identified. And that's one of the big advantages of open source and being transparent.
Okay, thank you very much.
I can just add something. We're also learning a lot by things like this. The Linux Foundation put together a core infrastructure initiative after, I think it was right after Heartbleed, where they invest money directly into projects that are core to our infrastructure. So that's Linux, that's actually recently GNU PGP product, and other initiatives that we find are underfunded. It also, security is shifted from a corporate vendor to individual companies. So the Linux Foundation can fund support of this. Or companies who are particularly worried about security, since it's open source, they can put more security engineers on that product. So it's really, once we identify problems and see that there are issues and that there are improvements to be made in the code that we're working on, individual companies and individuals can actually go in and commit resources to making things better.
Yeah, so I have to say that was also something, I'm happy that there is a systemic learning, so actually the community as a whole learned something. That's very good. Other questions over here, I think? No.
I am Musallam Al-Farsi from the Research Council.
Where?
Yeah. Sorry. I have a small question related to the licensing of open source. Usually when we buy proprietary software, we find a big rules, big list of rules and big to read about this software, why not use it, why to use it, what to do, what not to do. But we are not going to do anything with proprietary software because it's owned by one company. Now with open source, also we have this list. We have GNU, we have BSD, we have MIT, we have too many licensing lists, okay? What is the most common mistake taken by programmers or new programmers in relation to licensing of open source?
Well, the most common error is not to put any license on your code. And then I cannot use it because I don't know what will happen. And maybe somebody else will use it and actually confiscate it. But if you look at large projects, the biggest issue is when you want to mix software which are on the GPL kind of license, which means basically that the software is free and whatever you do with it will stay free, and software which is based on the MIT license or family of license, which means that I give you the freedom, but you can use it, add stuff, and what you added doesn't have to be free. So it really, you need to understand what kind of business model you want to build if you want to make something more classical, similar to the Linux kernel, or if you want to build a freemium model, which is what some software like, for instance, Joomla is a very interesting CMS, a content management system, where you can, the base is free, but you can buy proprietary add-ons, which are not free. I don't think it's such a good idea, but I still think it's a very good software. But you have to understand those differences. Once you understand the importance of licensing and what business model it usually you want to use, it's usually very clear what you have to do.
If I may add to that, I think one of the biggest mistakes by developers is to not really care. I've seen a lot of projects running into problems because somebody integrated code that he got from somewhere, and then it turns out it was licensed in a non-compatible way. On the other hand, we also see a growing interest in developers to learn about this stuff, to really understand it. At Foss we started 3 years ago a legal session where we brought in lawyers, intellectual property lawyers, and people from the European Commission and etc. to discuss the legal aspect of open source. And we thought it would be good to have some lawyers meet open source developers. Well, it turned out to be exactly the other way around. The room was crowded with developers who wanted really to learn how to do this stuff right. So the biggest mistake people make is ignoring licenses and not understanding the consequences of them. And if you want to have an introduction to that and more information, there's enough information online available. The open source initiative on the OSI website, they have a long list of all this stuff. It's also one of the things we at Red Hat have to care about because we combine a lot of different projects in our products. So we have worked our way, and compared to proprietary licensing, it actually is a lot simpler because the family of licenses that are actually used is extremely small. You have something like 80 open source licenses that are regularly used out there, but they typically fall in two families. It's BSD-like or GPL-like. And from there you can take everything and combine, with exceptions. But as always, when you get big, when you grow, and when you plan to run a business with this or to bet your life or your economical survival on it, get good legal advice. I don't like to make sort of promotion for lawyers, but in that case, really know what you are doing because it's important. That's my best advice.
Also, similar to that, don't make up your own license.
No, never.
It can be, you can say GPL seems really complicated. I don't want to read all that. I don't want to understand licenses. So you write a license that says anyone can use this for any reason, and that's your license. That's a really bad idea. These licenses that exist have been vetted by lawyers. There's case law and other things in various countries that cover these licenses. So definitely learn about them and don't just skip it altogether. Yeah.
Open source licenses have been tested in courts far more than proprietary software licenses. So again, this is to assure you, if you move into the open source world, we have our stuff sorted. We know what we are talking about.
Okay, thank you very much. So do your homework and read about open source licenses before you start your business on it. Next question.
Good morning.
Okay.
I'm Amjad, the owner of Nawat company. We are open source software and services provider. My question is for the Red Hat gentleman. From the marketing strategy perspective, now when you try to promote any software, open source software, sometimes if you like asterisks, so they will ask you what the hell is that asterisk, where it comes from.
Yeah.
So when we try to promote open source, since it's an open source, everyone knows that open source is a free. Then why you are charging me here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what we try to, focus on the marketing strategy perspective, is it from the security perspective or is it from the low cost of the tools that you are going to provide for your customer, and why?
So let me put it this way. Red Hat is making their money not by naming the projects we use. The money we make is based on the fact that we have established ourselves as a known brand. The Red Hat, that's why I'm wearing it. That Red Hat is Linux and middleware, and a lot of project is not really of interest. You have to focus in marketing on establishing yourself, your company, your product as a brand. And the brand is separate from product development. In my experience, and I'm quite radical in that, customers are not interested in licenses. Customers are interested in solutions. Now, if open source is part of your argument why your solution is better than other solutions, then please use it. But if it's not part of that, then focus on your brand value, focus on your local expertise, focus on your knowledge and your reputation, but not on the licensing. And you're absolutely right. The moment you talk too much about open source, typically the customer says, hey, it's open source, it's for free. Why should I pay? We made the split a long time ago in 2002 at Red Hat, where we said the old model doesn't work anymore. We had Red Hat Linux, you could download it for free. We completely switched that business model into a separate community branch, which is the Fedora project, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux as a product. And it's always clear, if you talk about Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you have to pay for it. You can get the source code for free, but not the compiled binaries. And this differentiation and making sure that people understand what the difference is, and one is the stuff they pay for and where they get something in return, and the other is where they can participate in making stuff better by working with upstream development. That's the thin line you need to find for yourself how to best promote and do it. If you need more information for that, talk to me afterwards and I can help a little bit. No problem.
Thank you. Any other advice on open source business models?
I think the main added value for your customer is actually that you're able to provide them with a solution, something that works. And if you say, yes, it should be free, freedom is never free. So they are free to work with somebody that asks them a license and does not have your market expertise. You provide market expertise and you need a setup cost to be able to work with them. And that's just the rule of the game.
Okay, so maybe one last question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sangeeta, e-government consultant, and my question comes from the experience of two different projects. One is based on the open data in the public sector, and the other is the experience of building a government community communication portal completely based on open source Joomla, which did not really take off. Now my question is precisely this: is open source only looking for solutions or based on innovation or a new project that you're rolling out, or would it also suit for organizations and systems which are already in place, probably with a rich archive of data? Now if we are taking the latter approach, what would be the best practice forward for large organizations and systems to move forward in open source arena? This is my question. Thank you.
Okay, very interesting. Who wants to get us on it?
When you have a lot of pre-existing data, typically they will be in some sort of proprietary format. Now, you have the choice between digging you a little bit deeper in the hole in which you are and go on with one of the proprietary service that already manage part of your data, or you can see how much you need to pay to translate actually your archive and to make it sustainable long term. It's a hard question to answer in general. I worked, for instance, for at some time Matra, who had a huge amount of the document in an old Xerox platform. Very nice text processing platform from the 80s, early 80s. We spent about 3 man-years to convert all those data in the best possible way to a semi-open format, and then some more time to translate it from this to something that would be open and sustainable. And what they also noticed at that time, that the main issue was not to be able to go on editing all documentation, but to be able to reference them. And so we started to work on more data repository and in text indexing than really keeping the old data. I would say there's no general answer, but it's really the story of the frog in the boiling water. If you make it boil very slowly, it will stay in the boiling water because jumping out is more effort than staying in the boiling water until it's cooked. And you don't want to cook your business. So yes, it will be hard to explain to your boss that they will have to invest much more than they thought just to build on top of what they have something that will work long term. It will also have to, it's complex because, for instance, in document you have the choice between the OXML and the ODT format. You have two competing open source formats, one by Microsoft, the one by the rest of the world. And it's only part because your document can also be done with, I don't know, 3D Max, because you did some 3D models, or Blender, which is more open but not that open either in terms of format. So you have to have a long-term plan and some tactics to manage all your elements. I think the open source is really the way to go, because it's a way to enable you to start to look at what can you do for 80% of your data, have a solution, have tools, and go on. And I will kind of illustrate it by an answer to an earlier question about security. I once did a platform for a very large French legal organization. And we were partnering with a hardware manufacturer that wanted to sell their firewall. So it was expensive, so the organization said, we will think about it in the next phase. We will maybe not put it. We also, as a small company, had a contract to run the platform, so I was nervous. I mean, it was early in the internet history, but nevertheless. So I used open source software to monitor the network, see what kind of action were done. And so Sunday morning at 4 o'clock, I was waked up by my robots, and I found out that we were attacked. Actually, they were attacked by people that found it would be interesting to attack them as a very large, very visible legal organization. If I would have played by the rule, asked what I did, permission to buy a firewall, to set up stuff, well, they would have been attacked, destroyed, and we would probably have been in big trouble because we were the company running, and obviously somebody had to be punished. So it was easier to punish us than somebody else. So fortunately, we were able to find out, with some help, to find the people. We actually were in Portugal. Why? That's life. And they got a surprise visit by the police the Monday morning. It's the open source will enable you to have a master plan. And also, you have probably to think about what the skill sets are of the various people that are working. Choose a platform, not because it's necessarily the easiest and fast to deploy, which is the case of Joomla, for instance, but something where you know that you have people skill sets to maintain it long term, and that might be other platforms.
And I think one of the important lessons is you need to, this sounds weird, I know, design for failure. Everybody designs for success. Yeah, that's good. But your Joomla project didn't really take off. Now, the more important thing, and the thing we do in open source, is we fail fast. The moment we see something is not really going in the right direction, we fail and we start over again, because we don't have enough resources to support failure. Now we have scarce resources, we have to be very careful with them. The typical mistakes that I see out there is, first of all, open source is used as something important. It's not. The solution is important. And if you build the solution with open source, all the better. But the real thing is, open source is not the one single important thing. The solution is always more important. Second, people tend to over-design and over-aim, to make too big projects without real cultural and philosophical support inside the organization. It's a top-down thing. We need to do all of this with Joomla. Go, do it, somehow. You get external people, but if you don't have the internal people convinced in the right direction, and if they are not willing to participate, if they just sit there and wait for the solution to come, it will not work. So my strongest advice is always break it down into smaller blocks that are dependent and interdependent, and in every single block be ready for failure. Have an alternative ready to immediately continue. Make it an iterative process and not one that is at one goal and then the whole thing stops. It will never work that way.
Thank you for that note, because this is quite inspirational in terms of the data. I'm coming back to the archive of the data. It seems like I've got a clue to run the traditional systems in terms of processes and data capture, but probably the innovative use of data intelligence or data statistics part to be taken off through a meta format. I just got the clue from your answers, and we will modularize it much more for failure proof. Thanks.
I'll give you a simple example. In Germany, there is Deutsche Telekom, which is a giant company. And what they decided is they're having so much data that they created a concept which is called the developer garden. Deutsche Telekom takes care of making all internal data accessible to developers, and then they are free to innovate on top of that. And they have regular meetings where people can show what they have done, and sometimes new products come out of it. Sometimes it's just a big mess. Sometimes the lawyer says, are you crazy? Please don't go there. This is really dangerous. But the fact is, you need to have feedback cycles continuously running, and not only top-down saying, we're going to try this, and if that fails, well, we'll find something else. You need to get the communication rolling, and in order to get there, as you said, you need to work on the lowest level to make the data accessible, and then innovate on top of that with the freedom of open data. That's the best thing. Yeah.
Great. So thank you very much for this interesting discussion. Agility, flexibility, timeliness, that's, I think, very good arguments for open source. The speakers are still here for the lunch or for the coffee break. We have now a coffee break until 12:30. And I would like to thank Patrick, Les, and Jan for contributing and sharing all their knowledge. So,
thank you.